Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
I'm Sylvia Earle. I'm an ocean elder, explorer in residence, National Geographic, and founder of Mission Blue.
This is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community from around the world on topics of wonder and interest. You can ask us questions in the Q&A box, and later on in the program, we will get through as many of those as we can. I am going to share my screen. Uh-oh. Here we go.
There you are.
And before we get started today, we want to remind everyone that
the world is blue. Never forget that.
Water connects us all.
Yes.
Today, we're going to be joined by our friend Ian Urbina. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist and focused really on the dark and often criminal aspects of industrial fishing, particularly on the high seas. And we urge all of you to pick up a copy of the ocean.
This one.
The Outlaw Ocean.
Yes.
There it is.
Cover to cover. Read it.
Ian, can you join us? I know you've just returned from the field. Oh, there he is.
Thank you. I was waiting for my formal cue. I wasn't sure when I was supposed to enter. So good to see you.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
You're dry.
He's dry. But not for long, right?
No. Off again.
So those of you who've joined us for past episodes of Dive In, you've heard us talk about fishing on the high seas, overfishing, and all the problems with that. But Ian's really been focused on the human factors, these issues of, human slavery, abuse, trafficking, all manner of things that go on out there that are really out of sight and mostly out of our mind when we're buying products that are derived from these animals.
Or tuna. Big deal.
Yeah.
And the ocean has a really good friend in Ian Urbina. And so do the people who are shanghaied is the word that once was used, kidnapped, if you will, exploited one way or the other. And I'm really eager to hear your take on what's happening, Ian, and also what we might be able to do to combat it. The key is knowing. Most people are just oblivious to what's going on out on the high seas, out of sight, out of mind, and you can't care if you don't know. It's a good starting place.
Mm-hmm.
There you are, sitting on the dock with your little backpack.
Is this how we often spot you in the field, right? The go bag.
Yep. This is in Mombasa, Kenya, and that ship behind me was one that we were trying to figure out how we could sneak on. And you can see a guy in the left-hand side. He's wearing a white shirt, and he's painting over the name of the ship because they were trying to quickly change its identity. This ship was called the Greco 1, part of a fleet of Grecos, and they had been illegally fishing for quite some years in Somali and Kenyan waters, and we, meaning my photographer and investigator, and I wanted to get on board so that we could check the serial numbers on the engine and prove that these were the illegal ships that they said they weren't. So that was me there contemplating a scheme, is what you
mean. Yeah, and it's tough to get onto these vessels because there is so much that they really don't want to have come to light.
Mm-hmm.
But you've been so fortunate to be able to.
I don't know whether you'd call it fortunate.
Yeah.
With what you go through, is not many people would be willing to subject themselves to what you do in order to get the straight scoop.
And really working with the guys who are out there trying to enforce what rules that there are. So this is like a ranger that you're working with here?
Yeah, and I'll go back to your original point just to sort of set a broader backdrop. I mean, I think you're quite right that what the Outlaw Ocean set out to do, and readers can be the judge as to whether we succeed, is to sort of indeed tackle the marine issues and the conservation issues and the environmental issues, but to do so through a different entrance, which is by way of the people often, but really by way of the intersection between human rights, labor, and environmental crimes. Like that's where we live, on the ocean, we being myself and a couple of other folks on my team who produce these stories. And then also to sort of show the public that one, not only are the problems out there out of sight and out of mind, but they're far more diverse than people, I think, initially imagine. They think of ocean plastic and they think of, overfishing, and they think of the BP spill, and sometimes they think of Somali piracy, which is this photograph. But that's the sort of typical extent of the spectrum. You guys are separate because you're specialists and experts, and but I think the general public don't think of intentional dumping of oil, sea slavery, as you said, arms trafficking, ship thievery, and repo men who are hired to steal ships on behalf of banks, abortion providing at sea, illegal whaling, and legal but unethical whaling, and just a myriad of other things that happen out there that I don't think the public realize. And the reason I think it's important to broaden that taxonomy is that it will stoke the sense of urgency that the public and governments and consumers have when they realize it's not just one problem, it's 20, and they're all under the umbrella of a lack of governance and a lack of public interest. So that's kind of our agenda, just to frame it more broadly.
There's the phrase "freedom of the seas" means you can get away with just about anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's okay if people are responsible, but it's also licensed to get away with stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, Sylvia, when I was writing the book, I wanted to get into the history, the sort of philosophical history of the sort of undercurrent that set up our present predicament. And one of the things, as I looked back at literature and philosophy and legal history, that really emerged was mare liberum, the freedom of the seas. And as a legal concept, it sort of had, this guy Grotius, had this notion that the seas, especially the high seas, international waters, should be protected as belonging to no one and ostensibly everyone. And what that means in practice is that commerce, should be allowed to move across it in a way that is unfettered by any individual actor, be it pirates or be it one particular government. And that, again, in a law setting and an economic history setting, makes a lot of sense. But the dark underside of that is, well, on the one hand, we've got a global commerce now that delivers an iPhone or Nike shoes or $1.99 can of skipjack tuna, like within a week of it being not even existing, right? The tuna is existing, but before it's pulled out of the water, or things come to the shelf, whatever the product is, in impossible efficiency and at impossibly low prices, partially because they travel by ship, not on plane, not on rail, not on truck, but they're traveling through this unfettered mare liberum international waters where there aren't as many rules, police, and taxes and customs officers that are sort of slowing it down. But that's the upshot of that is we get cheap stuff fast, right? Too much, too fast. But
Ian, there's a lot of talk about the subsidies that governments provide to the fishing industry and others, but specifically the real problems here with the fishing. But there's a human subsidy. Yeah. It's a cost in human lives, and the labor that is bought if they get paid at all.
Can you
at a low level?
Can you tell us a little bit about the story here of Lang Long?
Yeah, so Lang Long, and this is a perfect segue to Sylvia, what you were saying. Like there is this hidden cost in a lot of the distant water fishing fleet, and the hidden cost is or a hidden subsidy is the impossibly low wages and brutal, working conditions, not to mention the violence and other abuses, murder sometimes, with impunity. And all of that together is essentially an industry subsidy by way of inaction on the part of governments. And it's a subsidy in the sense that, a fishing fleet, let's say in the case of Langlong's ship, this guy you see, he's Cambodian, but he was working on a Thai ship. And the reason the Thai fleet can be so bloated and too many boats on the water, under mechanized boats, economically unviable boats, is that the ship captains and fleet owners are able to stay in operation because they can depend on slave labor, right? So
Slave labor,
in
right.
the form of in Thailand, as is this case here, it's mostly Laotian, Cambodian, and Burmese, Rohingya workers that are fleeing desperately poor, often extremely violent countries to come into Thailand, which is a middle class, fairly stable country. They take these jobs, incredibly cheap wages. They go off to sea. Sometimes they don't even know that they're taking a job in fishing when they enter the country illegally. Most of these are undocumented migrants. And they enter the ship and they go off to sea and they're kept there. So in Langlong's case, he was sort of a textbook instance of a trafficked migrant, came in from Cambodia, thought he was going to get a job in construction, ended up at the ports, walked onto, sort of sent onto a ship. They go off to sea. He's sick all the time, beatings, in an awful situation, attempts to flee. He jumps overboard and tries to swim to a supply vessel, is caught, brought back. And from then forward, they shackle him. The captain shackles him by the neck whenever he's not working. And over the course of the next 2.5 years, Langlong is sold ship to ship, but usually shackled, right? And a supply vessel worker sees him shackled, delivers the goods, goes back to shore. The supply vessel gets in touch with an anti-trafficking folks and says, I saw, I know things are rough out there, but I saw something that was really shocking. And that began a whole process of buying Langlong's freedom. And I had heard about the case and interviewed Langlong about 10 days after. This picture was taken about 10 days after he had been rescued, bought into freedom in Songkhla, Thailand. And we chronicled his story in the New York Times.
It's an amazing story.
He's just one.
Yeah.
But he's an example. And yeah.
So this is the luxurious captain's cabin, right? On one of the vessels.
What did your quarters look like, Ian?
I slept where the crew slept, so I slept in these sorts of settings. I usually preferred to sleep outside because on the deck, but you had to make a call. Either you were in these tight quarters where the air was impossibly hot, or you're out on the deck where it was cold and there were a lot of rats. So you kind of had to choose your medicine, but I usually chose the outside. But yeah, these are living quarters for crew. That's a Cambodian worker there. They make these hammocks out of fishing nets. And the reason, look, he's only like about 2 feet off the ground. You can't stand up in these quarters.
No.
But the reason they stay up off the ground is because when the rats take over the ship, which is usually when working stops, so the really late hours, the one place they don't tend to crawl over are the hammocks. So I learned that the hard way by sleeping on the floor at one point.
Yikes.
So that little backpack that you carry around, does it have a hammock in it?
It did after that first experience when I learned my lesson. Yeah, it is a hammock and it's got, all sorts of other oddball things, peanut butter and, just like kind of crucial things I need to
survive.
Yeah, to manage.
Yeah. And then you had this opportunity to go out with the Sea Shepherds, and we usually think about Sea Shepherds and their work on, both legal and illegal whaling, just trying to call attention. And I think this image you shared was taken with a drone, wasn't it? And
yeah.
The minute that they realized they were being kind of watched, they covered up the evidence.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this was the end of the whaling effort when that Sea Shepherd had been engaged in, as you well know, for many years. And this was kind of the frustrating tail end of their efforts, where at this point on this particular mission, and this was in 2019, the Nishin Maru and the Japanese fleet um, uh, had seemed to always be a couple steps ahead of Sea Shepherd and more able to evade them. Um, and uh, and so anyway, uh, that is when Sea Shepherd said, they've sort of the sort of the Japanese fishing fleet, the whaling fleet, has outpaced us in terms of the kind of intel they've got and their ability to evade us, and it just doesn't seem viable anymore for us to. Furthermore, Japan changed its laws and essentially made this sort of work by Sea Shepherd and the like essentially a terrorist level crime, and the stakes became really, really high for even for non-Japanese Sea Shepherd folks to be engaged in this kind of direct action protest conservation work. So a lot happened, but this was one of the final missions.
But this related mission, it was just such an epic tale.
Really,
I mean, it's just such an incredible story where, we see these kind of rogue fishing vessels. They often will turn off their satellite transmitters, so that even people who are trying to enforce things, trying to understand like what the catches are and where they're coming from, they kind of go dark, right? And nobody really was enforcing it, and so the Sea Shepherd turned around and they're like, we're not having this, and they set off chasing the Thunder, and it went on for like months, weeks.
Yeah. I mean, so Operation Icefish, as it was called, was this mission to sort of show the world and shame governments on a couple of issues. One was, as you said, the problem of ships going dark, turning off their transponders and becoming invisible and therefore able to get away with anything. But the other was, and in some ways the more serious one, was even when the ships keep their transponders on, there was this thing called the Interpol Purple List. And to get for a ship to be placed on the Purple List meant you had to have engaged in really bad action for a long, well-documented period of time. And there were 7 ships on the Purple List at the time of this event. And these are the Purple List is essentially an arrest on site list. It's kind of most wanted on an international level. These ships are bad news. But the reality was, and what really annoyed Sea Shepherd and a bunch of other folks, including folks at the Interpol, was that no one was arresting these vessels, and they were coming in and going out of port and unloading their ill-gotten catch and making millions of dollars. And the Sea Shepherd and the Thunder, which is the ship on screen, was at the top of that list. It had earned $67 million of money over the course of a decade, fishing illegally in the Southern Ocean, primarily targeting toothfish. And so Sea Shepherd said, you know what, we're going to go out, we're going to find the purple listers, the ships on here. We're going to prove that it's not that hard to do, and then we're going to chase them and we're going to harass them, and we're not going to ram them, but we're going to throw all sorts of spotlight on them every time they try to go into port to embarrass everyone involved, allowing this to happen. And so the Thunder they found, and they chased them for 110 days through hell and gone, and ultimately the Thunder sunk itself to get rid of the evidence, and the crew and the officers were rescued and prosecuted. But yeah, as you say, it was an epic story. There you see the Sam Simon, the Bob Barker on either side, these 2 Sea Shepherd ships chasing the Thunder on this 110-day epic event.
It's just pretty amazing. I mean, from the ice fields all the way along, and ultimately they decided
to tell the story. What happened?
Yeah, no, I mean, as Liz, you were saying, like the chase began with the impossible start where a lot of people didn't think that Sea Shepherd would be able to find the Thunder in the Southern Ocean. They had really no pre-existing intel, but they kind of cobbled together where they thought they would be fishing, and they got a little help from different agencies, and they found the Thunder nets in the water, and they announced that they're going to make a citizen's arrest, and the Thunder decided to run, and off they began. And over the course of the next 110 days, the Thunder went through a Category 5 storm. This specific area of longitude that, normally you wait for storms to pass and then you slip between them. The thunder decided to go straight through it, hoping, we can only speculate, hoping that they would lose their pursuers by doing such a crazy thing. And of course that didn't work. And then they went through this incredible ice field, which is super dangerous. The icebergs can sink ships and often do. That didn't shake them. At some point, the Thunder got so frustrated that it turned around and began charging at the Sam Simon and Bob Barker to ram them, because the Sea Shepherd guys took some of the nets that were in the water from the Thunder and confiscated them. So for a while, the Thunder was chasing the Sea Shepherd guys. It just went on and on and on. And I was on for a very short while. I was lucky enough to sort of finagle my way out to sea and get on board and chronicle it directly on board. But it went all the way up to, the coast of near Nigeria. And it was really unclear what was going to happen. All parties were running out of fuel, out of food. And then suddenly a sort of SOS call came in from the captain of the Thunder saying they needed help and they were sinking. And so they all abandoned ship. And the Sea Shepherd guys with cameras mounted on their helmets quickly climbed on as the ship was sinking. It took, an hour and a half for the whole thing to sink, but they ran around the ship and collected evidence, grabbed papers and footage before it went down, and then rescued all the crew, and thus began a whole law enforcement legal process where the officers were prosecuted. So it was this amazing tale, which rarely happens. I mean, this is the sinking of evidence and ships going down where bad things happen. That's pretty commonplace. It's
right.
But the actual, engagement of law enforcement and the capturing of the guys and all that was really unusual, and in many ways a real success for exactly what Sea Shepherd set out to do, because the story became world.
And there's a film was made documenting this, about the chase, and the last thing that the Thunder really wanted was to go to port with the evidence.
Right, that's right.
Which is why they chose the drastic means of pulling the chain.
Yeah.
Look at this crew. Look at these. What's impressive, among other things, how many women there are.
Yeah.
Well, the captain of the vessel is a woman.
Yeah.
She's kneeling there on one. This is her kneeling on one knee in the center.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's quite right. So, I mean, having spent 6 years getting on a lot of these vessels, it is just shocking how male a world the long haul fishing arena is. Merchant marine, it's still extremely, I'd say 5%, female, 95% male. But the two places where I encountered truly 50-50, 60-40 kind of statistics were Greenpeace ships and Sea Shepherd ships. And also just incredibly diverse, nationally. You had 10 different countries on board, and so it was really impressive.
It's amazing, really, that there is this. They're not there for the money. They're there because they really believe they can make a difference.
Yeah.
And it's obvious that they are making a difference. And it's not a male-female thing. It's clearly
getting the job done.
Yeah, and women are welcome.
Yeah.
To be part of the action.
Yeah.
And I guess that stems from the attitude of Paul Watson and the leaders of both Greenpeace and Sea Shepherd. It's in the culture.
Yeah,
it's about. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really
bring what you've got, and it's gender neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's excellent. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I know you've been kind of dealing with some of these issues, is this boat's just kind of an example of one of these fishing boats. But in this time of COVID, we've been seeing quite a number of vessels that are just kind of out there doing their thing one day, and the next day they're just turned off.
Mm-hmm.
The parent company just shuts them down. They stop sending money, and again, we're having the situation where the primarily men and boys on board are just kind of left stranded wherever they happen to be in the world, and really have no good way to get home.
Mhm.
Could you tell us a little bit about some of those things that are going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, I'm thrilled you brought it up because this line of reporting has a lot of very dramatic things in there, murder and slavery and things that more easily grab the attention of editors and readers, because they're so um, urgent and acute. But the subtler and slow motion, um, but in some ways equally life-threatening problems are the ones that are, as a journalist, hard to get people to care about. And seafarer abandonment is a textbook example of one of those things that it's a abuse that happens passively and in slow motion, but it results in people's lives being ruined and people dying and stuff like that. But it's very hard to get people worked up about it. And it's, as you say, it's a long running major problem. It's on merchant vessels as well as fishing vessels. And it's exactly as you described, Liz, like a ship owner, a ship insurer, a fleet owner, whoever is the key player back on land, makes a sort of calculated decision, maybe because they got sued by someone and they realize, oh, we got to cut our losses. Maybe, because one of their ships runs into some huge fine someplace and they can't afford to pay it. Who knows? But essentially, they decide to um, sever the tie with the vessel, and the vessel is anchored a mile off of England or Ghana or Venezuela or Argentina, wherever it is.
Forever.
And those folks, the captain and everyone on down, doesn't do anything without clearance from land, right? So they're constantly in communication. Where are we heading next? What should we do next? Et cetera, et cetera. What route? All these things. And all of a sudden, the phone stops working, the emails stop coming, and the people on board don't have the immigration papers to get off, and travel by land, the finances to do it. They don't have the fuel or the finances to sail all the way back home. And they're also just unsure whether they even have the clearance. Is this just the guy had a heart attack and he's in the hospital for a week? Or is this because he's just like cut us loose and we're on our own? And so a week turns into a month, turns into 6 months, turns into 2 years. And these guys are sitting there, no clean water, no food, kind of, their families often don't have any idea, especially the crew who have, language barriers and, no internet access and all these things. And so things get really, really desperate from a mental health point of view for the crew. They try to jump off the ship and swim to shore. They drown. They try to sneak into the country. They get locked in a detention facility as undocumented immigrants. Again, it's just this spiraling situation. If they ever even make it home, all of their licenses are expired. They have no wages for all the missing period. They're in really dire situations, and even making it home doesn't mean they're on the road back, because now they're in debt and they don't have the ability to get a next job. So, and this is happening at any given moment. There are hundreds of ships around the world that are in exactly this predicament, and there's very little infrastructure for helping these people.
It's another example of the importance of what you're doing, Ian. People can't care if they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And even if once they care, it's getting motivation to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
But first you have to know.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm confident that this is news to most people.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it's just happened more and more, particularly during the pandemic.
that's right.
Right.
We're really
Yeah.
seeing a big uptick in it, and in a lot of the with the fishing boats. I mean, a lot of the animals that are the wildlife that's being taken is not sort of your dinner plate fish. It's not all tuna. It's not all
Oh, the tuna's a
swordfish.
big
The
problem.
tuna's a big problem,
Yeah.
but a lot of it is like even the small bait fish, or the so-called trash fish. Don't hit me. That
Fish. Yes.
yeah, they're just being kind of ground up into products that we don't even really think about being associated with
Chicken
fish.
food, cat food,
Cat
dog
food,
food,
cosmetics,
cow food. Yeah.
fish oil, this is kind of sketchy,
Aquaculture feeds the salmon.
yeah.
Yep.
And
That's right.
and so have you seen that as you've been out in the field, where you kind of, I mean, most people think of fishing that it's that it's going to be like a Chilean
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
toothfish or something.
It's an incredibly timely question because there's a piece coming out in the New Yorker February 15th. That's a year and a half in the making. We reported it off the coast of Gambia. We were on a Sea Shepherd vessel that was there doing a patrol in coordination with the Gambian government, which didn't have vessels of its own. And the focus of the story was the presence of foreign vessels, largely Taiwanese and Chinese, in Gambian waters, some of them licensed and some of them not, but all of them targeting this fish called bonga fish, B-O-N-G-A. And bonga fish for eons have been very plentiful, very nutritious, and key to subsistence for Gambians and Senegalese. And sort of, they were so plentiful that a decade ago, you would go to the little fish market and they would give bonga away for free, to the locals and try to sell the other stuff. Well, bonga is now targeted for 17 fish meal factories that are in Senegal, Mauritania, and Gambia. And the local fishermen can't keep up with the industrial boats that are netting all the bonga for the fish meal. And the fish meal factory, as you know, but maybe your viewers don't, they grind the fish up into these high protein pellets that they then mostly use, in this case, to feed aquaculture. So the salmon and the shrimp and the things that are being grown in either nearshore or on land fish farms that for many years were thought to be more environmentally sound because they were ostensibly slowing ocean depletion of wild caught fish, are actually accelerating the depletion of wild caught fish because, enter Gambia, the boats are now catching all the wild caught fish to feed them to the farmed fish, to feed them to the Norwegians, Americans, and Brits, and who are eating farmed fish thinking they're doing a good thing. So it's this crazy cycle, and that's what the story is about.
And the equation is that it takes, large numbers of the small fish to get small numbers of the big fish. It's not a good business model.
Yeah, no,
nobody pays for the fish. Fish are free.
Yeah.
At least that's how they're accounted for.
Yeah.
And Ian, I really appreciate the way that you put the light on the connection between, of course, the excruciating issues with respect to humans, but it's ocean chemistry. It connects back to climate. We're disrupting the carbon cycle by taking so much of the wildlife out of the ocean. Mm-hmm. So there are many layers of wrongness here. And many things can be solved if you look at where does the fish come from, who's being affected, what does this do to the ocean chemistry? Mm-hmm. What's it do to, so many things are connected to abusing the way we treat the ocean and wildlife in the ocean, as well as the human life associated with fishing.
Yeah. No, you're right. So, the if you even just look at the carbon footprint, so take squid, right?
That's another
California,
small fish and squid.
Right, you guys are in California, so you know this well. Like California squid gets sent to China to be processed to get sent back to California restaurants. And the carbon footprint of that is insane, right?
Yeah.
Same with bonga fish, taking the fish out of Gambian waters to then put it in a Chinese-owned factory that makes it, pelletizes it. Then it ships the pellets to China, that then gets sold to Norway, that then gets fed to the salmon in Norway, that gets shipped to. The carbon footprint that makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, it's your great work that's really helping people to understand where these connections are. How it makes absolutely no economic sense, that a lot of it is really covered by these subsidies, and
the human subsidy
and the
factor.
Human subsidy factor.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're also seeing it showing up in just the plummeting of biodiversity at large, because you take out those small fish, and that's the food that a whole host of other animals are reliant upon, from
the squid
from whales to seabirds to sharks. Just a report today saying that like 70% of the oceanic sharks have been depleted in the last
sharks
50
and
years.
rays.
Yeah.
And then there are the tuna, down by 90%, the bluefins in the Pacific. Mm-hmm. Well, more than 90% in the Pacific. Mm-hmm. Only 90% in the Atlantic. The good news is there's still some tuna left
Mhm.
The good news is there still are some of these little fish off Africa.
Mhm.
Menhaden in the Atlantic, similar story.
Same story. Yeah.
Around the world, we have looked at fish as if they're free.
Mhm.
Literally a counting base of zero until you take them out of the ocean.
Yeah.
So a whole host of economic false accounting.
Mhm.
We don't account for the human factor. We don't account for the subsidies. We don't account for the cost of the fish
Yeah.
because they're free, right?
Yeah.
Until they're dead. And
Yeah.
then we pay less than they're really worth even then.
Yeah.
So what can consumers do to make kind of better choices?
And I just want to like, false accounting is a really great turn of phrase, Sylvia, that fits very much within. I wish I had heard that before I'd written the book, because on the notion of hidden costs, which is a term you hear often, so it's almost a
Write
little
another book.
I was going to say that. Yeah. Next book. Come on.
easier said than done. But I mean, I think much like we long viewed the sky, right, the atmosphere, another global common,
Yeah,
as a
free.
bottomless trash can where we could release carbon endlessly, and it really didn't matter because the dilution of the expanse would cause it to flush away. Like, this was the intellectual history of that wrong, false accounting. Similarly, the water, the marine realm, was viewed as a sui generis, self-replenishing, bountiful realm where you kind of could take stuff out, but they replace themselves, and that also was the core misconception of a long false accounting. That now science is saying, oh wait, they're all at the edge of collapse. But
But
for
we
so
knew.
many decades, that was not thought to be possible.
Yeah. The knowledge was there, but it wasn't generally accepted.
Right.
We need to get to that level of now we know, not just a handful of scientists or other
Right.
people who care to follow the evidence,
Right. Right. Right.
like you.
Right. 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 Well, I mean, you asked what can be done. I mean, like, I think I always like to take a step back, and if we're talking about the full range of problems that we're attempting to report on, so from murder of stowaways to arms trafficking to the turning off of transponders to subsidies that cause there to be too many boats on the water to sea slavery to intentional dumping of oil, these are very diverse problems, but they all are happening on the water, and they have effect on the people and the place. I think the solutions that cross all of them are the best ones that should be started first: marine protected areas, required transponders, better supply chain data, etc. I think if people think of themselves, the thing they should do is, first of all, don't try to figure out how can I tackle all these problems. Just choose which among them speak to you most, and focus on those.
Hmm.
So and think of, are you all of us are taxpayers, consumers, voters, where we have partners and kids, and we have people that we're around and sort of talking to all the time, so we're kind of educators in that sense. Like, so we all are wearing lots of different hats, and we're donors. We give money to things that we believe in. And I think, like, if you think of yourself in all of those ways, then you can find lots of little things you can do. Oh, if I'm going to eat I can stop eating seafood. Or if I'm going to eat seafood, I can try to do so in a more responsible way. And to inform myself, I'm going to go start just a half an hour spent looking through one of these resources like Monterey Bay Aquarium, or that
Well, a good
attempts
place to start in is to think of it as sea life, wildlife,
Yeah.
instead of
food.
looking at everything in the ocean as if it's there to be consumed
Right.
one way or the other, as a product or as food.
Right.
Say, look, the greatest wildlife trade on the planet is ocean life.
Mhm.
We call it seafood. It's
Right.
ocean life.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and
Very
every shrimp counts. It does.
But it's
Right.
true. I mean, if you think about it, as if what kind of land wildlife do most people eat? Maybe they get they're they get a deer or
Right, right.
maybe elk, something, or something like this. But it's not something you go to the store and
Songbirds.
get
At
every
least,
day,
yeah.
and you certainly don't press a bunch of robins to get, bird oil. It just
Right.
doesn't happen, At least it shouldn't happen, but
Yes. No,
but it's kind of wacky, and I appreciated too that this connection that you're bringing back to the use, just really the overuse and the subsidy of just of
Is
petroleum
that is that
products.
is that you there with a black hat on?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Good guys are supposed to wear white hats.
but not when it's that cold,
Maybe
But
it's
I would,
blue.
right, exactly. Any hat that's given to me, it's going on.
That's right. But you've been working a little bit more now with under the kind of the UN umbrella, not just New York Times, right? So it gives you a little bit more protection and getting out of dicey situations
Right,
when you
right.
need to.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but
yeah,
this is that project where I guess Greenpeace is just trying to bring more attention to
right.
um, the the real dangers of some of the offshore oil and gas exploration,
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So,
The
so
carbon cycle
the
again.
carbon cycle again.
yeah, this was a really great story. So what you're looking at here is a drilling rig called the Songa Enabler. It's a Norwegian drilling rig, and it was distinct in a couple of ways. One, it was a drilling rig that was going to be dropping into the seafloor further north into the Arctic than any drilling company had ever attempted to go. So more extreme conditions and legally dodgier because they were, by some legal perspective, in international waters where they weren't allowed to be doing this. The Norwegians said because of complicated geographic arguments about where the plate was, that it was actually still Norwegian waters. But be that as it may, this was way further into the Arctic than anyone thought was, well, not anyone, a lot of skeptics thought was prudent, because if there was a spill up there, it was going to be really, BP was tough to clean up, imagine up here in these conditions. And it was also just encroaching further and further into this very pristine, delicate habitat that thus far didn't have this amount of industrial activity. So Greenpeace was trying to get to their parking spot. This drilling rig floats, it travels, you guys know this, but
Right.
and so Greenpeace was trying to get there to the exact coordinates before the Songa Enabler would get there, and essentially set up a barracks, set up put the ship right in the key parking space and occupy the space and make a sort of public spectacle of this problem, and force the Norwegian Coast Guard to arrest them and remove them and just slow down the whole process, which cost millions of dollars to the oil and gas company. Unfortunately, it didn't work out as they wanted. Greenpeace didn't get there fast enough. The Songa Enabler got there first, but Greenpeace entered the zone anyway, illegally, this surrounding zone, staged these protests, and were summarily arrested by Norwegian Coast Guard, and the ship was towed back to Norway and impounded. But it did end up, slowing down the Songa Enabler and creating a lot of public awareness about what the Norwegians were doing. And what's also key is this is Norway, right? We often think of Scandinavia as, which it is, a very progressive place, and the governments have really good policies in many regards, but the Norwegians are very aggressive on their oil and gas drilling. And this was another point that Greenpeace wanted to make, was that Norway was not living up to its reputation as an environmental steward by expanding aggressively on oil and gas drilling into a space that most folks thought was perilous.
Right. And it's not just, the risk of the oil spilling or blowout, or as you say, how difficult and dangerous cleanup would be in basically Arctic conditions compared to, quasi-tropical Gulf of Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also just the introduction of an incredible amount of noise into the environment.
And the fact that we should be leaving the oil and the gas in the ground.
Even when the ground's covered by water.
Yeah.
No, it's also just it's stoking an addiction that has created climate change, and so anything that frees up more of that drug, kind of is bad. So exploration in and of itself is oil and gas exploration is simply expanding the problem, which is a dependence on fossil fuels, rather than redirecting attention and economics towards alternatives. So that was the other big point that they wanted to make, as you guys are saying.
Yeah, and it's great that you're, kind of doing more of the, I think, under the broader umbrella of the UN, and getting a little bit more. I mean, you still do things with the New York Times and stuff, but a little broadened out, and people are now able to, help support you directly, which is really awesome. So
How do they do that, Ian? What's the mechanism?
Yeah,
I love it, and I think people should. I want to end on the pictures on a upbeat note instead
good.
of
Yes,
an
I
oil
agree.
rig.
Yeah, that's right. Let's enter the
Little harmony here.
yeah,
That's good. Yeah, no, I mean, after 17 years of the Times, I wanted to stay on this line of reporting, and so I created a journalism nonprofit called the Outlaw Ocean Project, and it's like I say, it's nonprofit. We produce these kinds of stories, and our goal is that we put them in tier one venues. So we still publish in the New York Times, but also we go global, so Der Spiegel and BBC and the Australian Age, and and then we translate them into 6 different languages, and we provide these stories for free to these tier one outlets. And then we do all sorts of other creative things, work with musicians to try to make music based on the stories, etc. But it's all funded by large philanthropies and individual donors. And if you just go to the website, theoutlawocean.com, there's a place where people can donate to continue supporting these kinds of stories. But we don't, I work with the UN as an investigator, but I still am a journalist. And so I try to make sure I'm not becoming an advocate, or else I'll lose my ability to, publish in the New Yorker and the New York Times if I become an advocate. So I'm right at that edge. But now I can do it with a much broader set of partners.
But you're just not taking sides. You're showing
facts.
Yeah, it's the evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The evidence is so overwhelming. It might seem as though you're taking sides, but you're not. I mean, it's just here's what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there are small things that are quirky and distinct to the profession, but if ever asked, like, well, should I buy this tuna or that tuna or no tuna at all? Like very concrete, like what should I do questions. I never engage. So I say, okay, here are the resources and people you can go to, and you should ask them. I've vetted them. I've talked to them. I trust them, but I can't ever advocate a specific solution. I can give you the evidence. And I also try to really keep my lines of communication open with the oil companies and and all these folks, so that I can do a good job in explaining their perspective. Even if I disagree with it, I just try to kind of clinically lay it out there. But so that's the only difference.
But I don't know many who put themselves on the line the way you do and put a hammock in your backpack for when it's needed.
Yeah, I
when
appreciate
amenities are short, you're prepared.
He doesn't have just a mosquito net; he's got the rat net.
A wraparound mosquito net. Cocoon, we call it.
Cocoon, yes.
Well, anyway, it was really great talking to you guys, and thank you so much for.
We have some questions.
We've got some questions as well.
Do you mind being?
We're gonna we're gonna take questions, and you can also raise your hand using the little raise your hand feature. And if we get anybody doing that, then Gigi will call on you, and she'll let us know that someone's there. So Liam is asking, given the human propensity towards slavery over our long history, how do we move mind share from the passive not supporting slavery to the active anti-slavery, similar to today's idea of being anti-racist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I guess maybe I would take a little bit more optimistic outlook, which is uncomfortable for me because I'm always the dark, pessimistic guy in the room. But I don't think that most of the world is comfortable with slavery. I think that most of the world either doesn't know about it or doesn't see it defined in the way that we are here. So, in some places in the world, the notion of having a 13-year-old who's working in your factory to pay off a debt because someone transported that person from another country to that factory, and that cost, and so they got to pay off that debt. So that means they're going to work for free for 6 months. That's called debt bondage. Well, that's also called slavery, right? And most of the Western world legally and just has kind of wrapped their head around that that's not a safe or fair labor contract. And again, shackling people and these things. So I don't think the problem is that. I think it's more the case that buyers, are too far removed from the things that they're buying, whether it's stuff coming from the sea or stuff coming from China. And our economy, our globalized economy, has leveraged that decentralized nature of commerce and making of stuff to such a degree, and sometimes intentionally, so as to remove the consumer from the producer. So there isn't really an awareness with most of the consumers about the conditions. And folks like you in the research you're doing, and journalists and lots of folks, lawyers and policymakers, are constantly trying to resist that. But I think that's more of the supply chain getting longer and more complicated is a bigger reason, in my view, that slavery has remained a presence.
Yeah.
Well, one example, the salmon farmers will say that they're just feeding salmon chow, and it only takes 4 or 5 pounds of salmon chow to make a pound of the fish that goes to market. But where do those little pellets come from?
Right.
What's involved in making them?
Right.
The little fish have a cost associated with them. In fact, they eat too. So if you start with plants, you say, how much does it take to make start with sunlight and photosynthesis and plants. How many pounds of plants to make a pound of cow? Mm-hmm. It's about 20 pounds, plus or minus. Mm-hmm. But if you're talking about a farmed salmon, it's not how many pounds of pellets, it's how many sun rays go into making the plants, and how many pounds of plants to make the plankton that makes, and how many pounds of plankton to make the little fish that make the bigger fish that ultimately make the pellets that go into making. I mean, the supply chain.
Yeah.
It is a supply chain.
Web.
Yeah.
But then you add on top of that the human cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you have made more awareness, more apparent.
It's really,
and it's really important to know, where does my food come from?
It's kind of just demanding that transparency, because we're just bombarded by these marketing campaigns all the time, whether it's the shiny lipstick or whatever it is, but it's got some ocean product in it.
And how do I make a difference?
Yeah.
And it's the choices you make. You need to know the validity behind those choices.
Yeah, and I think it's also inspiring and important to remember, like, slavery is a dangerous term because it's so big, that it can be used a little bit clumsily. I think, like, if you think of just labor and human rights abuses, something a little bit less edgy, and you think of in the last 40 years, and you look at other supply chain moments, you think of sweatshop garments, or you think of blood diamonds, or you think of, kind of dolphin-free tuna, right? These are other moments where, again, they didn't solve the problem. Yeah, we can agree on that. But there was this reckoning,
Right.
Something happened. There was a big story, or some big movie star got involved, or whatever. And suddenly everyone knew about it. And suddenly the corporate players and the governments had to do something about it. And
Right.
all of a sudden things emerged, flawed things, certification systems, and
This is an example.
Yeah.
well, I don't know that, as much as I wish you were right, I don't know that book has done the trick. But so I think there's a lot of precedent for, like, different supply chains, different, types of commodities having these moments. And I feel like, marine life or seafood are having the beginning of this moment because of years of work that you guys have been doing in the ocean conservation community, and other players, John Kerry and the EU yellow carding, and some journalists, and various players all together are starting to get more attention on these things.
It's awesome.
Can we take some more questions?
Yep. So
Have
Stephanie,
a little more time?
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm stuck in a hotel. I'm not going anywhere.
Stephanie's asking, how is it that you get notified when things like this are happening, or where ships will be? Are there informants, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, it varies, right? So the thunder, I heard about the chase of thunder because I had a source from another story years ago that was at Interpol, and I had called him and said, "Hey, you're at the Marine Division now, and if you hear, I'm really on the market for good stories. So if you hear of anything crazy and weird, let me know." And he called and said, "Hey, have you heard about this thing?" And off it went. Lang Long, I knew, the guy who was the Cambodian who was shackled. I had spent months and months researching the problem of sea slavery and was trying to decide, should I go to the Falkland Islands and the fleet near there, or South Korea or Ghana, or the South China Sea near Thailand. There are all these places where there were hot spots of really problematic forced labor. And so I started looking around. You start talking to advocates who work and academics who work in those areas, and ask them, are you seeing a lot of cases? Tell me about some of them, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you start sizing up sources. Really, so much of good journalism is assessments of people, and, like finding people that you trust and will be faithful to you, and kind of give you good information in a timely fashion. And I had some really good sources in Thailand, and they said, "Oh, you really need to go to Songkla. There's some stuff happening down there."
That's great.
You got a lot of people signing in, just congratulating you, Ian, and saying,
Keep
"Go
at
for
it.
Well, thank you.
Carry on.
Yeah.
Make it so.
Probably, those people are probably my relatives, like my mom. But that's all right. Well,
So Olivia is asking us about your thoughts about the future of deep sea mining.
yeah.
High seas.
High seas.
Yeah, I mean, the three of us have talked about this for a year and a half now.
Yeah.
So you guys know. So just to take a step back, deep sea mining, seabed mining, is this kind of, we're on the front edge of it. It seems to be kind of, if the high seas are the next frontier, then the sea floor is the frontier beyond the frontier. It's truly removed and then some, because it's out there at sea, underwater, and there's just it's a really dark place when it comes to governance and oversight. And there are many things that are worrisome about seabed mining. One is the drive to do it is a drive that, to a large degree, is a hunger for precious metals, manganese, and others that are often serving the purpose of giving us gadgets we love, like the iPhone, but also long-lasting batteries and these sorts of things that we are embracing to try to deal with our climate change problems. And so that demand is, in many ways, good because it's trying to solve one problem, but it might be fueling the creation of other problems. So that's a really worrisome potential. The bodies that are supposed to be keeping an eye on this, namely the Seabed Mining Authority, is an unusually arcane, opaque, problematic agency, if you will, that for which it's really unclear, just to be conservative, that they're doing their job in policing companies and requiring environmental impact assessments and really doing some protective due diligence. So that's worrisome. The place where it's happening, it's an industrial activity happening on the seafloor, where we know less than nothing, about the impacts of what that would do. The kicking up of all the soot, the kind of
The plume.
flattening the plume,
The diversity of life that lives in the deep
so
sea.
and so that's another reason to worry. And then that most of the places where mining is likely to begin, Papua New Guinea and other places, are places where the governments are desperate for income, and therefore probably willing to make fast deals just to give them the benefit of the doubt, and there often are corrupt lobbyists and key players who are, kind of taking advantage of that situation. So all those factors together make me think it's a really scary thing. And, the three of us have been trying to figure out a good way to sort of tell the story, not as an article. For me, we could write right now, and many people have done quite a good job writing articles about it, but I'm trying to find a narrative way to do it that would show these concerns. But I definitely, as I think you guys do, think it's a really big concern.
Yeah, and just thinking the amount of energy required to go to these depths. I mean, I know what it takes to go down there and do a science mission, and it's not like you're bringing up oil or gas which wants to be naturally buoyant and come to the surface. You're talking about trying to like pump
Hmm.
floried rock uh, or living rock off the seabed, very heavy material. It's going to take an enormous amount of fossil fuel to bring that
Yeah.
kind of stuff up.
And when you get and money, like when you get
Money, yeah,
multi-billion-dollar players involved, I get nervous because the multi-billion-dollar players have multi-billion-dollar lawyers and lobbyists,
yep,
and when that's who you're dealing with, like the wall of governance and journalistic oversight and all these things becomes impenetrable because
yeah,
they've got the money to insulate themselves. So
yeah,
that worries me too.
yeah, me too.
Plenty of room for corruption.
Yeah, yeah.
So Evelyn's asking us, with everything that happened with the Thunder, did it actually send other ships on the purple list into hiding or make them nervous?
Yeah, I mean, Operation Ice Fist, I only looked at the Thunder. It was this, long and complicated and really impressive in many ways endeavor in which the Sea Shepherd folks chased a bunch of the other purple listers. The Kunlun, it's been a while now, so I'm forgetting the name. I used to know them by heart, but Sea Shepherd went after a lot of them and caught some of them, and then sort of caught others where they were in port and they were supposed to be arrested, and then they snuck out. And there were all sorts of different outcomes with I think 5 of the 7, if not all 7. But yeah, they were all targeted over the course of whatever 3 years that campaign ran. I don't think any of them were as dramatic as I recall reading about them and following as the Thunder. And some of the players were just kind of, they had a really bad patch there because they had these annoying conservationists on their tail. But then, as things go, everyone had to move on and they changed their name, reflagged, and they were back at it, which isn't to say it's not worth doing, but some of those players I know for a fact are still out there and the ships are still operating. They just have a different name and they're still bad news. But
Yeah.
More work to be done.
Oh, yeah.
right.
So Alex is saying that with a horribly flawed food system, ballooning human population, and growing income inequality, and the consistent disconnect from where our food comes from and how it's harvested, where do we go? What do we do?
Oh, great guru.
Oh, guru.
Yeah, this is where you'll see me getting like hives and sweating, like not feeling comfortable with this. Not because it's not a good question, but just because it's at such a high altitude that I
Yeah.
feel a little vertigo. Yeah, I tend to demand that we come down. Like it's a question about the war, and I'm of the view that the war is ongoing and maybe even unwinnable. But it doesn't mean you don't fight it. You fight the battles the entire time, and you can win many of the battles. But I never get into discussion about the war. It's
Yeah.
just so, because I don't believe the answers I hear about winning the war, nor do I think I have that level of insight. So I guess I would say, don't go too meta and try to find doable things within your interests and abilities and focus on those. That's a really Pollyanna response, but it's best I can muster.
No, but if 8 billion do something in the right direction,
Right.
will
Yeah.
that change?
Yeah. And
Whatever it is, everybody can do something.
and and as the Ocean Elders talk about, just their one thing campaign and just sort of picking the things that are achievable for you, so you don't get too depressed and dejected. But there's things that everyone can do that combined can help make a
Give
big
tuna
difference.
a pass.
Give tuna a pass. try to at least understand where your food is coming from. Buy as local as you can.
Yeah.
And seasonal, little things like that can help as we start to address and try to address these much bigger problems.
Yeah, and again, I would just go back to like, don't forget that you're not just a consumer. You're also a voter, a taxpayer, a donor,
Right.
a parent, a spouse. You're lots of things, and each of those categories you can do little things. And so, yeah, maybe you choose this over that in terms of your dietary or buying things, but you also choose to set aside 15 minutes to talk with your son or daughter about this, or your partner, and you also decide you're going to give $10 to this organization, and you're also going to check out what this guy's voting record is on this issue. Like, again, in all of those capacities you can do small things, and they add up to a multi-leveraged approach.
Absolutely. David is asking us, what about the 30 by 30 initiative and how can we increase marine protected areas?
So I'm not a 30 by 30 expert. I mean, I know the reference here, and again to the others. This is the goal of setting aside, and correct me, guys, here if I'm wrong, as you surely know, but
It's a good start.
30,
Yeah.
30% of the ocean surface being protected
That
by.
doesn't mean you can have your way with all the rest.
Right.
Well, it's one of those things where I think that I'd love to see sort of more of a push on, to the UN to say, why aren't we working on an international treaty to protect 30%
At least.
at least
Yeah.
now, not by 2030?
Yeah.
Why are we waiting? We know.
Some countries aren't. I mean, Chile has moved ahead with 40% of their exclusive economic zone under at least some form of protection, and little island nation of Palau, 80%.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they're just squandering all the rest.
Yeah.
They have management of all of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
basically, that's kind of the way we should look at the whole world, isn't it?
Yeah.
About nature. We need to be mindful of not abusing any of it.
Yeah.
But some areas we really need to cherish and treat as sacred in a way,
Yeah.
because they have a higher degree of vulnerability or greater answers, like old growth forest. There's no excuse for slashing any more of old growth forest. And that applies perhaps to the deep sea. It's old growth on a mega scale.
Yeah.
These manganese nodules are millions of years old, not just thousands.
And they're living.
And they're living, right?
They're not
still
dead
living.
rocks.
Anyway, just the
Yeah.
thought that if we can identify the most critical areas to really embrace with a high level of care, but recognize that we can't just abuse any of it, even your backyard. We need to do what you can do where you can do it, and
Yeah.
then try to impact the rest. But
Yeah.
30 by 30 is a catchy phrase, and it might even work.
Right.
Because it's something that people are beginning to recognize, that protecting nature means you can breathe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And that the climate, you're giving yourself a break when you give climate a break. How do you fix that? By protecting nature every way you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Protect our life support system.
Yeah.
All right, we've got time for one more question, and we're gonna put Ian on the hot seat again from Todd. He wants to know. He says, "You're the knight in shining armor, shining diving suit. But what is your closest call in dealing with these outlaws on the high seas?"
Yeah, I hate these. I mean, I don't like these questions that make me out to be some action hero, because that's definitely not.
I'm gonna look for that next figure.
Exactly. It'll look like Paul Giamatti, and it'll be nerdy.
He has a Barbie.
Exactly right. Exactly.
With your backpack.
Yeah,
Action
backpack.
figure with your backpack.
Right,
Yeah.
hunched over and worn bags under my eyes. Closest call. Well, Somalia. Yeah, if you've read the book, then that we got in big trouble in Somalia. We being Fabio Nascimento, my Brazilian partner in crime here, and photographer, videographer, and he and I really got stranded in Puntland in a certain place, and our protection left, and we were stuck there and hiding out on a rooftop for until we could get out. And that's one place where I literally thought we might not make it out alive, because we were getting told as much, and then in Borneo, we were trying to investigate this really inspiring underground railroad of anti-trafficking folks who help rescue Langlongs, these sorts of captive crew. And there was a rescue underway. A guy was hiding out in the mountains of Borneo. He had run from his ship, and he was being hunted by bounty hunters hired by the captain. We got there and in this rubber plantation, interviewed him, and halfway through the interview, some guys with guns showed up and said the interview's over, and that was kind of scary.
Yeah.
As well. So, truth be told, the thing that was scariest were the conditions. The potential of getting infection or bitten by, rats, or just getting some sort of sickness, and you're out at sea on a ship, and they're not going to take you back in.
Yeah.
but I always say whenever I delve into these dodgy waters, anything that scared me and any threat I faced pales in comparison to two categories of others. One is the people I'm reporting on. I mean, those people, I have an American passport and money and a way out, and these people are undocumented, from the global south. In many ways, they are invisible and expendable, and they are really threatened, on a daily basis with harm. And then the people that I work with and rely on, the translators, the photographers who are in country, and they have to stay there when I leave, and they're there when I write the story and it comes out. Like, those people are actually the ones who face real danger. Nothing I face is anything like what they encounter.
Right. 'Cause they've got to live there in that community, and
Right.
it's
Survive there.
survive there. And we've seen like a huge uptick in the outright murder of conservationists and people that they
Yeah,
stick their head up, and
that's
it's
right.
whack. They just
And
it's
journalists in these countries, you know, they've been targeted, whether it's Somalia or Brazil or wherever, these places. It's very dangerous to do this work.
yeah.
I thought you might say that you were most afraid of drinking the water when you're on those ships.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
As a life straw.
I have a pretty strong stomach, and I bring obscene amounts of pills of every sort with me, because I've been sick so many times on these ships that now I've been okay with the water thus far. The things they cook for me to eat, that's a different matter. Like,
Yeah.
some of the stuff I'm not going to survive this meal, but I always eat whatever's in front of me, because you'll lose your source if you don't.
Must be doing something right. Just keep on doing
Doing
it.
it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And I really hope people will pitch in and
Help support you.
help support what you're doing.
Yeah.
We need more of you.
Well,
We
right
really
back
need
at
to
you.
take care of yourself.
Thanks a lot, and I appreciate you hosting this.
Well, thank you. And before we close today, we just would like to say thank you to our producers, the Ocean Elders, and mostly to everyone out in the community that keeps showing up to these sessions and participating with us week after week and month after month. Dive In is really feeling like home to us, and I hope it does to you. And
You're welcome back anytime, Ian.
we're very grateful.
Yeah.
We're grateful
Check in.
to you for checking in, and grateful to everyone who keeps joining us on these little adventures, getting these great stories going. The water does connect all of us, and you're making us believe that this platform is going to be able to make a difference. And before we go, on February 11th, we're going to have Carl Safina join us.
Oh, that's great.
Be great. So maybe you'll come and ask him some questions. Get even
I will. Yeah.
if you're not out at sea, battling.
No, I will.
Rats.
I'll email
Rats.
you.
But before we go, we need to remember that
We have to take care of the ocean
as if our lives depend on it.
because they do.
Yes, they do. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
everyone. Until
Take
next
care.
time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.